The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
At least 20 teenagers and one adult were injured, two of them critically, yesterday morning at Franklin Regional High School in Murraysville, Pennsylvania, when a 16-year-old fellow student attacked them with two knives. Murraysville Police Chief Thomas Seefeld said during a press briefing that a sophomore identified as Alex Hribal stabbed students in one wing of the school during a 5-minute period. The boy reportedly used two straight knives measuring 8 to 10 inches. Not all of the students were cut or stabbed. Some were actually injured in the process of trying to get away from the alleged stabber. Some of them required immediate surgery. Seefeld said that the police had never received a call in the past about the suspect. They were still investigating the motive as of this morning. However, they have charged the student with 21 counts of aggravated assault, 1 count of possessing a weapon on school property, and he is being charged as an adult. The incident started shortly after 7 a.m. Eastern time yesterday morning. Students were still arriving at school at the time, and authorities say that the first 911 call from the school was made at 7:13 a.m. Eventually, the incident came to an end when the school's assistant principal was able to subdue the student with help from others. My email inbox has been flooded by, as you can probably predict, two types of emails in response to this. There is one group of emails which says we should be glad that this was two knives instead of a gun. Imagine a semi-automatic or automatic a weapon in this case, and we would definitely have had, or at least would have been much more likely to have, deaths in this case. The other side is from the gun advocates who say, no. If everybody in the school had been armed, if the vice principal had been armed, if the janitor had been armed, then this would have been able to have been stopped before the 21 or 22 people were stabbed in the first place. I think most of the audience knows more or less how I feel about that idea. I think that introducing guns, multiple guns into this would be incredibly problematic. And just imagine, let's say one person with a gun there does identify who the stabber is able to take the gun out, and let's just assume only shoot the stabber, even though he's in a crowd of people stabbing them. How do we know that a second person with a gun isn't going to hear the gunshot, run in, and shoot the individual they see with the gun? And now you have innocent people getting shot and killed. I am open to hearing more from our audience about how more guns in this situation and more guns in general would have been good here. However, if we make guns easier to obtain, even if Alex Hribal was not legally able to obtain a gun, if there are more guns around, if his parents have guns, if there are generally more guns in the system, it is simply mathematically speaking easier for Alex himself to obtain a gun and show up and shoot people rather than stab them. And then I think the headline would be different than 22 stabbed, nobody killed, right? I think it would be different. Email me about this. I know not everybody will agree. A man has been cleared of murder after spending 25 years in prison. This is a story not only about the incarceration system and the judicial system, but also about capital punishment. From the day of his 1989 arrest in a deadly New York City shooting, Jonathan Fleming said he had been more than 1,000 miles away on the day of the shooting, vacationing at Disney World. He even had documents that corroborated this story, but he was convicted of murder anyway. Prosecutors now agreed with him. Fleming left a Brooklyn court here in New York City as a free man just days ago after spending almost 25 years behind bars. A key witness had recanted a little while back, and now newly found witnesses implicated someone else in this killing. And after a prosecutorial review of the files, the documents turned out to support Fleming's alibi. The exoneration was first reported by the Daily News, and it comes amid a lot of scrutiny of Brooklyn's prosecutors' process for reviewing these questionable convictions. And this is in part coming from the new district attorney, Kenneth Thompson. Remember, from the beginning, Fleming said that he was in Orlando when Daryl Rush was shot in Brooklyn on August 15th, 1989. Authorities suggested that the shooting was motivated by a dispute over money. Fleming said not only was it not over money, I had nothing to do with it. And it turns out that that was true. Fleming had plane tickets, he had videos, postcards from his trip, but prosecutors said, no, he still could have quickly flown in, committed the murder, and then flown back to his vacation in Orlando. There was a witness who said, yeah, I saw Fleming take the shot, later recanted her testimony shortly after the conviction in 1990, saying, you know what? I actually lied to police because I wanted them to cut me loose from an unrelated arrest. Unfortunately, Fleming lost his appeals based on that recanting. And now this has been reviewed, and it turns out that Fleming indeed was not guilty, had an alibi which exonerated him. So I have a few things to say about this. Number one, this is no big party, right? This is no great victory, broadly speaking, of our judicial and legal system, because he still spent 25 years in prison. Prosecutors are, it's questionable whether they held back some exculpatory evidence, which is, of course, prosecutorial misconduct. And it took 25 years after he spent 25 years in prison to free him. So this is not a big party celebrating how great our legal system is that he was freed. It's good that he was freed, but it's incredible that he spent 25 years in prison in the first place. And then what this really gets me to is about the death penalty and capital punishment. This is yet another reason why we should not have capital punishment, because as horrible as it is that Mr. Fleming spent 25 years in prison, and he deserves to be compensated for that. Imagine he would have been earning money that would go towards his retirement. He now has no retirement because he was in prison for the last 24 years. He deserves to be compensated. But what if he had been sentenced to death? And what if he had been executed? There would be no undoing it. And again, it is yet another of the many, many, many reasons why we should not have the death penalty. Other countries at the level of development that the U.S. is at have already figured this out, and it is just yet another problem with our judicial and legal system, and we don't want to be exacerbating these problems where we sometimes have innocent people in prison for 25 years. The last thing we want to be doing, on top of everything, is executing innocent people, which has happened in this country, and that's an absolute disaster. There's a really interesting report out about, this was submitted to us on our Reddit subreddit, where you can submit stories. That's reddit.com/r/The David Pakman Show. And it's an analysis of how accurate cable news coverage is when it comes to the topic of climate change. And it's no secret that we see a lot of far from perfect coverage. I talk about the false balance we often see, where even though there is a 97% to 3% scientific consensus when it comes to climate change, on cable news, you'll often see it presented as a big controversy, with one talking head saying, yes, human activities on Earth are having an impact, and another talking head saying, no, human activities are not having an impact, incorrectly suggesting that there is some kind of 50-50 balance. Well, there's a study that's been done by the Union of Concerned Scientists, which analyzed how accurately the big three cable news networks, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, are when it comes to covering climate science. It's not good. The study found that in 2013, MSNBC did have the highest accuracy rate in its coverage of climate change. They were right 92% of the time. CNN was second, accurate 70% of the time. And listen to this, Fox News was third, only accurately presenting the issue of climate change and climate science 28% of the time. How pathetic. The inaccuracies identified in the report typically stemmed from dismissing or doubting science facts, or from overstating or understating current science. UCS analyzed almost 600 different clips of cable news coverage from 2013, all looking for references to either climate change or global warming. then they evaluated all of the statements made against those which are backed by actual science. Remember, only 2/3 of Americans even recognize that climate change is a real thing, and less than half of Americans believe that it is caused by human-related activities, according to the Yale Project on Climate Change Communication. So MSNBC, 92% accurate, CNN, 70%, Fox News, 28% accurate, 72% misleading. Fox, I don't really know what to say about this. The study also details, and you can read about it, where the networks go wrong. So MSNBC, in spite of being the most accurate at 92%, they really don't host debates about established science. And they also are sometimes not too forthcoming when it comes to identifying what is conjecture not based in science and what is science. Fox News, on the other end of the spectrum, often has co-hosts and hosts of programs directly parroting stuff that is absolutely not based in science. They disproportionately play up the points of view from the anti-science right, etc., etc. However, this is the most incredible part. The report actually shows an improvement for Fox News. If you go back to 2012 and look at the exact same report, Fox News's coverage was only 7% accurate. So should we be praising Fox News that they experienced a 400% increase in the accuracy of their climate change reporting? I don't know. We probably shouldn't. We probably should be more focused on the fact that only 28% of the reporting is accurate. And I don't even know what I can add. I mean, the numbers really do speak for themselves. The biggest concern, we know, right, as consumers of alternative media and as people with a critical eye for corporate media, we kind of understand what's going on Fox News, and we understand the influence of money and the issues that help to bring in viewers and fundraise for the right. We understand all that, but the average news consumer probably doesn't really pay attention to stuff like that. And that's really the concern when you flip by Fox News and you see the false balance and you see the inaccurate presentations of climate science. That's really the problem, and that's what's most concerning. Interesting situation at MSNBC. Remember back in 2010, we covered this back then, when Keith Olbermann, who was a host back at MSNBC then, he was suspended for donating to Democrats. And the argument was he's not allowed to do that. MSNBC doesn't want their talent doing that. This eventually led to Keith Olbermann leaving the network altogether. There's another donation-related controversy happening at MSNBC right now. Back in December, just a few months ago, Ed Schultz was scheduled to be the keynote speaker at a fundraiser for the Broward Democratic Party's big unity dinner in Florida. He was forced by MSNBC to cancel the appearance and also to claim that he didn't know it was a fundraiser, which is pretty hard to believe. At the same time, Republican Joe Scarborough, also a host on MSNBC, he hosts the show Morning Joe, is being allowed to deliver a keynote address for Cheshire County Republican Lincoln Day dinner in New Hampshire in May. This is a fundraiser that costs $50 per person. All of the money goes to the Republican Party. MSNBC has been asked to comment on why there is an apparent discrepancy or double standard here. They have not commented as recently as an hour ago when I finished looking for information on the story. And I think this is just an obvious question. Why is Joe Scarborough allowed to appear at a fundraiser for the Republican Party, and Ed Schultz is not allowed to appear at a Republican for the Democratic Party? It seems, without taking a position on which should be the correct outcome, that there should at least be consistency, and it should be either one or the other. Some are saying that this is yet another piece of MSNBC's trouble. Politico's Dylan Byers says that MSNBC had a ratings problem in 2013, that they had a revenue problem in 2013. At the same time, the first quarter numbers for 2014 are pretty good for MSNBC. I think that my view on MSNBC is unchanged, which is that MSNBC is the most accurate, as we talked about just minutes ago on the program, when it comes to reports on climate change and some other issues. But I don't know that this is really the best venue for progressive ideals, because even though MSNBC has chosen to take a more progressive view editorially, right, with their primetime programming, certainly, it's still governed by the same corporate plutocratic media structures that govern Fox News. And this is almost exactly what I said when the Keith Olbermann situation happened back in 2010. I watched less and less of this stuff. A friend of mine the other day said, "Did you see what happened on Rachel Maddow last night?" And I said, I have to admit, I've not watched any of MSNBC's primetime programs for probably a year at this point, other than very specific clips that are sent to us by clipping services that we should be aware of for the program. I remain unconvinced that the future of the dissemination of progressive ideas is going to be on networks like MSNBC. I'm open to thoughts on that. Let me know. And of course, join us on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show. And can you think of any reason why it would be okay for Joe Scarborough to do his fundraiser, but not for Ed Schultz to do the one he was invited to? Let me know. We'll update the story.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show truly is viewer-supported media. We are mostly funded by the David Pakman Show membership program, made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Liberalbias.com is your best source for unbiased news because conservatives know that you reduce the abortion rate by keeping birth control away from women while teaching abstinence-only sex education. We know that. We know that makes sense. Go to liberalbias.com for more information. Today's new member of the day is Tim Segru. Tim Segru, thanks for being a member of the David Pakman Show. You can join Tim at davidpakman.com/membership. What do you get with membership anyway? People often ask me this. It's very simple. You get access to the bonus show, which is a whole other program that's produced specifically for our supporters. You also get a commercial-free podcast feed that you can put in your mobile device or iTunes or on your computer, which includes both the full broadcast program, this program, commercial-free, and the bonus show. And you get an archive of programming that dates all the way back to 2005, where we had like the embarrassingly bad shows from the beginning of the David Pakman Show. It's pretty bad. Every once in a while, I get an email from someone saying, "Have you listened to the January 14th, 2006 show lately?" To which I always say, absolutely not. I refuse to listen to those old shows. It's just too embarrassing. But that's no reason for you not to listen to them. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to sign up today. I have a recommendation today. Sometimes I'll recommend a book. Sometimes I'll recommend a film. Last week I recommended the documentary Inequality for All. Today I'm going to recommend an online mailing list. This is the first time I've done this. It's called the Philosopher's Mail. I don't remember exactly how I was introduced to this. I think maybe through a TED Talk by Alain de Botton. He runs philosophersmail.com, just like it sounds, www.philosophersmail.com. And philosophersmail.com, it's kind of like a rewriting of popular news and current events, but presenting the issues that are actually important that we should be thinking about. So some examples are, you often see articles about 10 tips. These lists have become popular. 10 tips for falling asleep quickly, right? So the Philosopher's Mail will take that idea and they'll do a piece called The Upsides of Insomnia. And it's very interesting. Another example, we often hear salacious stories on all sorts of American corporate tabloid media about who cheated on who in Hollywood, okay? Philosopher's Mail does an article called The Stupidity and Folly of Adultery, taking a completely different view on infidelity and cheating. And we know all about how celebrity culture is just completely filling much of American corporate media. A recent Philosopher's Mail article is called I Want to Be Famous, and it analyzes the desire the human desire to be famous and to have celebrity status. I highly recommend it. I think at this point, I don't remember if I follow them on Twitter or just get their email updates. I think I get the email updates. I highly recommend this to you. It is very interesting reading. The articles are pretty short. Email me if you like it. Email me if you hate it. Email me if you've already heard of philosophersmail.com. Story out of Florida about a Florida man. As many a story begins with a Florida man. This in particular is a 73-year-old Florida man from Miami. He was arrested on attempted murder and arson charges after police say that he tried to burn down his neighbor's trailer home containing 2 women and 8 children because the women are lesbians. This is Braulio Valenzuela Villanueva. He's facing a hate crime charge over the fire that was sparked over the weekend at the River Park Trailer Park at Northwest 27th Avenue, according to Miami-Dade police. According to the arrest report, Valenzuela Villanueva had been involved in an ongoing feud with his neighbors that resulted in some heated arguments. So what did he do? Well, apparently at 4:25 in the morning, tensions boiled over, and he went over and set fire to a mattress that was leaning up against the trailer. When police asked why he did it, he said he absolutely can't stand the fact that the victims are lesbians, also saying that every time he saw the 2 women kissing, he felt a deep repugnance, and in his opinion, they did not deserve to have children. Obviously, the children would be better off with a guy who's willing to set fire to a trailer where children are living. That's obviously the guy that you want to have children living with, not the 2 women, because that would just be dangerous to the kids or something. Okay. I am, every time we have a story like this, I'm obviously completely shocked by it, but I have a few concerns because in spite of the fact that this seems like an open shut case, this is Florida and crazy things are happening in Florida with their legal system. And I do worry, what if he says that his hatred of these women was really dictated by a, you know where I'm going, sincerely held religious belief, and that in some way should be a mitigating factor in the sentence that Mr. Valenzuela Villanueva eventually receives. It's absolutely disgusting what happened here, and obviously he should be punished to the full extent of the law. But I'm a little worried because every time I hear about Florida man does X, Y, or Z, it seems like all bets are off. Absolutely anything could happen. Back alley abortions. There's some concern that the back alley abortion may be making its return. We know that so many conservative legislatures in states around the country are working very, very hard, way harder than they're working on poverty reduction or actual positive educational reform for children. They're working on restricting abortion access for women. Obviously for women, very few men require abortions. And they also are trying to restrict reproductive health services. They are trying to teach abstinence-only sex education, which we know doesn't reduce the abortion rate. And there are some thoughts now that this could lead to the resurfacing of the back alley abortions that Roe v. Wade was intended to prevent. It's a horrible natural experiment that is taking place in Texas, says Dan Grossman, the vice president of research for IBIS Reproductive Health, which is a nonprofit. We are going to see what happens in 2014 when U.S. women don't have access to legal and safe abortions. Anti-abortion advocates are, of course, saying that the idea of back alley abortions returning is just a fear tactic. That's what we hear all the time. The fact that they're saying it absolutely doesn't make it true. Grossman is actually part of a research team that's studying the effects of these new anti-abortion laws and family planning cuts, specifically in Texas. He says he's already witnessing the consequences of these restrictions, going on to say, it seems like women are becoming more desperate to find an option. We've heard reports of women taking herbs or other substances or intentionally getting punched in the stomach or beaten up, the same kinds of things they did before abortion was legal. We've talked about this for years. I've said that many times on this program that the evidence suggests that making abortions more difficult to legally obtain does successfully reduce the number of legal abortions. Obvious. But there is little to no evidence that restricting legal abortions reduces the number of abortions, period. Simple math dictates total abortions minus legal abortions gives us something. What is that something? It's these types of back alley and other unsafe abortions that are just absolutely horrible. How can one say they are pro-life? How can one say that they are pro-women, that they are for the reproductive health of women, when they are passing laws which aren't shown to reduce the total number of abortions? But I guess I should remember the political system. When these conservative legislatures pass these anti-choice, anti-abortion laws, they are able to then campaign on having done that, which completely separately from actually reducing the number of abortions and unwanted pregnancies, probably helps them raise a lot of money and get them reelected, and that's probably the big concern. Next, Luke Vargas will join us from the South American country of Colombia. Stay with us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Luke Vargas joins us today from Colombia. Luke is, of course, the United Nations correspondent for Talk Radio News Service. He has joined us from the Democratic and Republican National Conventions in 2012, from Warsaw, Poland, from Jordan. I think I might be forgetting one. But in any case, Luke, you're in Colombia today. What are you doing there?
Well, I'm here for the UN's World Urban Forum. Unlike those talks in Poland, which were overtly political, this is just a dialogue, basically. There are 20,000 people here, and they're discussing essentially best practices for how to sustain an urban environment.
So there's this meeting, ideas are being shared, and the topic of sustaining environments right now is important all over the world. What are the kind of specifics of what's being discussed there?
Before we get to that, I just wanted to say a few things about Colombia and Medellin, because I think, as I judge from the reaction a lot of people had, including my family and friends, to hearing I was going to be in Colombia and Medellin, this country has really undergone a tremendous transformation. This Colombia was for a long time synonymous with the global drug trade, with basically the practice of kidnapping for ransom, which was a big deal for Americans for quite some time. And this event could not have come at a better time. This is the home of Pablo Escobar in the old days, but the homicide rate has gone down from its height in 1991 when 6,500 people were killed in 1 year. It's about a tenth of that now. And now a lot of this gang activity, violent activity, is transitioning, again, from those violent practices towards more common forms of exploitation. This is extorting shopkeepers and things. And it's actually sort of this strange Muslim Brotherhood Hamas effect, perhaps, in which some of these violent groups have begun to provide social services to some extent and creating a competition to provide things for the people here. And that forced the government's hand in some ways. And now, and the reason why this conference is probably being held here is because they have done so much to provide infrastructure to the people in this city. And they're really seen, the Wall Street Journal actually named Medellin last year the most innovative city in the world. To answer your first question about the themes here, it's very clear I'm in South America. There are a lot of scholars who have come up from Brazil, people who are frustrated with how Brazil has managed the way they're hosting the World Cup and later the Olympics. Basically, this legacy of mega events is coming into sharp focus, where so many cities spend billions, in the case of Brazil, I think it's close to $75 billion, building venues that are of dubious long-term impact. And a lot of people are saying, instead of doing that, Medellin has done the right thing, which is to almost pretend it was going to be hosting a mega event, doing all the transit upgrades, thinking about housing, thinking about just general infrastructure improvements, and building them for their own purposes, so that when a mega event wants to come to town, like this UN conference, the journalists who are here from around the country, which include a lot of travel writers, come here and they write these great stories about how well Medellin and Colombia have put their priorities in order, which is very much the opposite story that we've been hearing about Brazil.
Yeah, and this, being from Argentina myself, there are just so many different topics we could talk about there. I mean, one, generally speaking, of course, and this isn't just limited to South America, it's the long-term impact of Olympics and World Cup in countries. That's one issue. The other issue is South American infrastructure. Right now in Argentina, there's just a crazy countrywide public transportation strike that has completely paralyzed the country. So I think that's a good place to go into kind of the next topic with you, which is what is the urban strategy there in the city?
Well, like most of Colombia, Medellin experiences substantial financial inequity and inequality. But instead of dealing with that as some of the ways I've seen in the US as a social nuisance or a problem that can only be corrected by force or police, the city has acknowledged the inequality and they've decided to start their infrastructure improvements in these worst neighborhoods. Some of the best schools, some of the best libraries and sporting and recreational facilities have been laid down in these slums, if you will. So instead of isolating these neighborhoods from the rest of the city, instead of, I've seen in some U.S. cities, making it really hard for people in these neighborhoods to get to their jobs in the better parts of the city, circuitous bus routes and the like, they've actually made it very easy for people in these bad neighborhoods to commute, to get jobs in the city, and thus bring up those neighborhoods. So, they've built elevator systems in these really steep neighborhoods to help people get home quicker. There's a few neighborhoods I went where they've created these pedestrian bridges over ravines that were pretty much impossible to cross over before. So starting at the most needy areas instead of doing very glitzy things in the downtown area.
Yeah, and I'm noticing, by the way, for people who are watching, all of the pictures we're seeing here are pictures that Luke took over the last few days in Colombia. We see the kind of hilly nature of the city of Medellin. Is that part of why it's difficult to put in a public transit network? I mean, is that a challenge simply because of the hilly nature of the city?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I think they've overcome it quite well. There's traditional buses that are all over the city. They're very colorful. They have these religious icons painted onto them and these very unsafe wood benches without seatbelts. Those are really less suited, as you could imagine, to the surrounding hills. That doesn't stop them in some instances. But the city started with a dedicated bus lane. It did a traditional sort of overground rail network, and they built these beautiful stations that connect all these different types of transit very seamlessly. And the one thing they did, which most of the journalists here are talking about, there are architecture critics from around the world who gush about Medellin, they built this cable car system. It's actually built by a German firm that does a lot of ski resorts in the Alps. And what it does basically integrates in with the other networks. You can transfer to it easily, and then without much of a footprint, with very low costs compared to digging a subway network, for example, they connect these neighborhoods that again were pretty much impossible to connect using any of those traditional systems. And now this is so successful that Medellin is in talks with a number of other countries around Latin America to implement similar systems. And as much as I tried to squeeze out the representatives from this firm for details, New York is actually one of the cities that they're in discussions with. So perhaps this really cool and quite scenic way of getting around may be coming to the U.S. before too long.
Hey, so last thing, Luke, the aerial pictures you took, I think it's from a helicopter and it was a police helicopter. Give us a little bit of the behind the scenes on what that was like.
Yeah, a few months ago, I was telling a colleague, I want to travel to a country like Colombia and embed with the police and take photos out of a helicopter. Not because there was a news peg, but because it sounded so fun. Lo and behold, got in touch with the police here, and some of the organizers here helped facilitate a helicopter overflight of the city. So got an incredible glimpse of what the city looks like from above, and it's much easier to understand when you have that incredible viewpoint. It was very cool.
All right, Luke Vargas, United Nations correspondent for Talk Radio News Service, checking in today from Medellin, Colombia. Luke, great to talk to you as always.
Sure thing, David. Take care.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Great to have you with us on the program today. Remember that you can support our work for free by donating a Twitter retweet or Facebook share through Donate Your Account. Go to donateyouraccount.com/David Pakman Show. This is a really cool thing. If you have a Twitter or Facebook account or both, it takes seconds to do this. It's easy. It costs nothing. and it helps to spread the word. You can also support our YouTube work by going to patreon.com/David Pakman. That's patreon.com/David Pakman. Tim and I believe it was Danielle sent me this story out of North Korea, which alleges that Kim Jong-un has executed a top minister with a flamethrower, burning him to death. And as the report says, as part of a second purge of top North Koreans following the execution of leader Kim Jong-un's uncle, 11 high-ranking officials have been imprisoned or put to death, including a security chief, quote, burned alive by a flamethrower, according to a South Korean newspaper. An additional 100 lower-ranking Workers' Party officials were fired, according to an unidentified source. And there is a third round of purges that will target regional supporters of Kim's powerful uncle, Jang Song-thaek, who was executed in December as a traitor after being convicted of anti-party counter-revolutionary factional acts. At the same time, remember that story about the uncle who was executed and then fed to 100 dogs or something like that? Some of the reports seem to have been false, and there is now an NBC News report that says that report, which said the North Korean execution by hungry dogs happened to Kim Jong-un's uncle, that was probably not true. So I'll be honest, I don't really know. Clearly, that was widely reported at the time, and now there are more and more reports saying it wasn't true. I don't know whether someone was executed with a flamethrower or not in North Korea. It is very interesting, though, that these reports are just regularly coming out, and the situation in North Korea is not getting any better for the people. That's absolutely for sure. I want to recommend something to you that I came across. This is not a new interview. This is from 2012. Liz Walls, who quit RT on air last month or the month before amidst the coverage of Vladimir Putin, she did an interview back in 2012 where she interviewed a guy named Jason Adam Tonis from the North American Juche Songun Ideas Study Group. It's basically like a pro-North Korean group. It is the most bizarre interview with one of the most unusual guests I've ever seen on television news. I want you to look this up. I'm not going to play it. I don't want to waste our time here with it. Just look it up and email me your thoughts about this. The title of the video on YouTube, just Google, search for this on YouTube. North Korea fear-mongering follows the rocket launch. It's from RT. Liz Walls interviews this Jason Adam Tonis. I don't know what to make of this interview. It is absolutely bizarre. I encourage you to check it out. Comcast has been named the worst company in America the same day that it filed that paperwork to merge with Time Warner Cable. They are filing their FCC merger paperwork, and Consumerist has announced that Comcast has won its annual poll for the worst company in America. This is now the second time that Comcast has won this particular honor. It last won it's called the Golden Poo Trophy back in 2010. And they are trying this to push this public relations idea that Time Warner Cable is this really great company and Comcast is this great company. And when they come together, their greatness is going to merge in some kind of explosion of incredible customer service and lower prices for consumers and just incredible satisfaction. The funniest line, and I've mentioned this when we first started talking about the proposed merger, their press releases say that everybody, including consumers, are really, really excited about the merger. And I still, now that it's been months since it's been announced, I've still not met anybody who's excited about this merger at all. The merger should benefit consumers. How will a merger of two companies that are incredibly horrible when it comes to customer service, what evidence do we have that that will improve the situation for consumers? You could argue, well, economies of scale will somehow improve the situation for consumers. We don't really have evidence that that has happened. I mean, look at the airline merger industry. Look at the prior consolidation of big media conglomerates. I just had a horrible experience with Time Warner Cable in the last 72 hours where, of course, unbeknownst to me, for the last 7 months since I moved to New York City, I've had an old cable box that I never should have had because it's outdated. And I had a sense that that was the case because, for example, when I would press guide it would take like a full minute for that to come up. And when I press next page, it would take like 30 seconds for the next page of listings to come up. In any case, the box finally died over a couple of days ago. Of course, 30 minutes on hold. First, I speak to the wrong person. Then I get the right person. They say they're going to have to send someone out. The only available time is 8 a.m., which is not really the most convenient time to have Time Warner techs at your house. And eventually the guy showed up and he was literally shocked that any technician would have even installed the cable box I had. He said, this is outdated technology. This is like the first high definition cable box. This thing barely works. I don't know why you have it. It wasn't that funny to me though, I have to say. So anyway, just a little anecdotal story about the ongoing horrible customer service that both of these companies provide. And we already have absolutely no evidence that there are price advantages to consumers from these big consolidations. There's just no upside here. And it's a really, really bad thing for consumers. It'll probably happen. I think if you disagree with me, let me know. But I think the merger will probably be allowed to proceed. Voicemails. Our voicemail line is 219-2-DAVID-P. Let's listen to a voicemail.
Hello, David Parkman. My name is Jason Harris. I'm calling.
Let's stop right there. This is the David Pakman Show, not the David Parkman Show, but I'll still listen to your voicemail.
Southern California. Listen, I can understand how you and I are very angry at what the Supreme Court did today.
Okay.
But I have a question. How do we restore democracy, the fate of democracy to the American people when they see a blame game going on between Republicans and Democrats, when many people I know in particularly don't vote because they see their vote as nothing more than a suggestion and not a vote?
Yeah, we've talked about this a little bit on the show, right? Number one, if you vote, you're voting within this very limited, there's a narrow breadth of candidates, first of all, and no candidate really is going to drastically change the system that allows them to get elected once they are elected. So that's problem number one. But the counter to that, and we've gone over this with Lewis many, many times, is that there is one party that benefits when there is lower voter turnout, and there is one party that wants you not to vote. That is the Republican Party. We know that the more people vote, the more progressive the results are. So it's a really bad situation. People have to vote, right? Because if you don't, things are going to get even more conservative. But at the same time, we do need some kind of systemic change, some tangible change to the entire infrastructure of our electoral system to really achieve change. And I don't have the answer. I wish I did. Let me play one more voicemail for you here.
Hey, David. This is the person who sent you the story about Germany's immigration, or at least I think I am. I don't know if you got that from you responding to my email, or if you got it from other users, or if you just found it yourself. I don't know, because I don't have the bonus show.
Okay.
So I'm not a member. And the reason why, well, there's multiple reasons why. One is I'm broke most of the time. And the other is that I bleeping hate PayPal. So I guess it's a roundabout way of asking, how would I go about becoming a member without using PayPal or a credit card?
Okay.
I know you've mentioned money orders in the past, but how will that work? Like, will you send me back a confirmation?
Yeah. So first and foremost, if you don't want to use PayPal, that's easy. You go on to davidpakman.com/membership, and right next to the PayPal buttons, there's Amazon payments buttons. You can skip PayPal altogether. If you don't want to use a credit card at all, I think both PayPal definitely and Amazon maybe allows you to do a bank transfer. I don't know. If you want to pay with a check or money order, you mail it in. The information is also at davidpakman.com/membership. You just write your email address in the memo. When we get the check or money order, we email you and we activate your account, and it's very simple. We do it every week. Not a big deal. On today's bonus show, a 9-month-old baby is booked for murder. Very weird. A rat gets on the subway here in New York City, and I'll talk about some of my rat-related experiences in the subway. And also, a man who peed in his coworker's coffee has been ordered to pay $5,000. Is that too much? Is it too little? davidpakman.com/membership. I would love to talk to you today on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.